Hello and welcome to this week's episode of What a Hell of a Way to Die. It is me, Nate. Francis is not here today because he's on vacation, probably doing some Disney stuff. I haven't checked, but I bet you that's what he's doing.
Look at this guy on fucking holiday.
Exactly.
Disney adult Francis Horton.
What is a holiday? What is a vacation? I have no idea what this is because I personally work in content nonstop.
Yeah, and also live in the United Kingdom.
You don't get an extended universe named after you for not doing content completely nonstop. However, as you can probably tell, I brought on a friend of the show, repeat guest.
Fellow prisoner of the content mines.
Yeah, Milo Edwards of the Trashfuture podcast and Masters of Our Domain podcast.
Yeah.
And Britanology, a sub-podcast of Trashfuture that we do together. We're going to talk.
That's right.
Well, there's a big, broad topic that I want to discuss. I feel like there's an extent to which civil-military relations are very different between the US, the UK, and Europe. There are two current news events that I feel like tie these together.
Okay.
So obviously, like, on January 6th, there was this big uprising in the US. A bunch of chuds broke into the Capitol building.
Yeah.
You saw some of this stuff. You had...
posed for the cameras.
Really
smart guys.
Yeah, didn't cover their faces, bragged about it on social media, tagged each other into posts.
And thought that Donald Trump was going to give them a pardon,
They thought,
which is the saddest part.
Yeah, I mean, Trump couldn't care less. But here's the thing. Significant among the numbers of the people, I would say retired military were probably one of the larger demographics in that group, next to jet ski dealership owners and guys with big boats who live in Florida. And the thing about it is...
beautiful boaters.
There were a number of active duty military as well as retired and some reservists as well.
It's a great thing to do when you're an active duty soldier, is just go in and be involved in some treason.
Guys were literally waving, according to news reports, waving their active duty military IDs to be like, this is my building, I can get in, I work for the government, etc. Not wondering what would happen next when they killed a cop.
Yeah.
Because my take...
I forgot that they killed a cop.
They killed a cop, yeah, they beat a cop to death. And I mean, my take is basically... I don't really want to hear about your opinions about how you need an AR-15 to fight against the government unless you've actually gone out and killed some cops, which, quite frankly, these guys do have the right to speak on that. But as often happens when you kill cops, unless you are also a cop and the cop that you killed is planning on testifying against you, they are going to go to jail.
Yeah.
Now, the thing is, because the military... has obviously taken a hard line against members of the military trying to overthrow the government. A big thing you're not supposed to do.
Yeah, I have heard that when you're in the army. That's like one of the big no-nos.
Yeah, the big, one of the oath things they make you say in your oath is that you'll support and defend the Constitution of the United States of America. That doesn't specifically say I'll support the president that I like and not the one I don't like. So on and so forth. Yeah.
Although, of course, a lot of these people do believe they are upholding the Constitution.
They do,
somehow.
Because somehow Biden stole the election and blah, blah, blah.
It's very much a the Constitution is like, what if people in Britain took the Magna Carta way more seriously? It has that similar, proto-mythological, you can just impute any bullshit you want to the US Constitution.
Yeah, well, also it's
be a political tendency.
Okay, it's also the way that so many people had their brains utterly eviscerated by Remain losing in the Brexit referendum and became wooferendum people. That's right. How a significant chunk of these folks are because Trump lost. Yeah. They basically, if the wooferendum was QAnon brain pills guys with guns, that's who this would be. And for American listeners who are wondering what the hell I'm talking about, one of the anti-Brexit protests that happened in, I believe, 2018, one of the most cringe, most ridiculous things that's happened was because one of the benefits of being an EU citizen is having...
it might have been 2019.
Maybe 2019,
I think it might have been even more recent.
It was pet passporting rights, basically that you can travel with your pet and you don't need to have immunizations. There's a common passport system for pets.
People love their fucking dogs.
And so in order to protest the fact that people would no longer be able to take their pets as easily on holiday with them to their vacation homes and whatever and so forth, they had a big protest, a mass dog walk against Brexit that they called the wooferendum. It was one of the most cringe things that's ever happened. And in a way, it's emblematic, in my opinion, of that kind of mentality of the one time politics has ever affected you in your life because you're a very comfortable upper middle class liberal and you completely lose your fucking mind about it.
It's one of those things, like, I don't know, man. The Brexit thing in the UK was such an eye-opening experience for me, purely because cards on the table, huge Remainer. Brexit, really bad idea. But man, did I come to hate my own side.
Mm-hmm.
Oh boy, those guys are annoying.
I mean, I wasn't able to vote in the referendum because even though I was a British citizen, I had my British passport, I hadn't lived in the UK as an adult, so I couldn't register to vote. And because I couldn't register, I couldn't vote abroad, etc.
Yeah.
I wasn't able to vote until I moved here and established residence here. Cards on the table.
So it's your fault that we lost.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah,
Exactly.
I would have voted
Jeremy
Remain.
Corbyn supporter didn't turn up to vote for Remain. What a surprise!
Yeah, but I would have voted for Remain, flat out. I would have voted Remain. I mean, like, whatever. But I couldn't. If there had been a second referendum, I would have voted Remain also. However, I think I would have,
or even a second referendum.
I would have forgone a second referendum and just dealt with Brexit in a more sensible way, in exchange for the Labour Party not rat fucking itself, and the one time what I felt like my politics being represented in electoral politics getting completely blown out so much that basically people will not stop blowing diarrhea about how it's the worst defeat since God invented time, and everyone on the left needs to be sent to a gulag, even though we also say that's what people on the left want to do.
Exactly, yeah. Well, because, the centrist journalists prevented the great pogrom that would have happened if Jeremy Corbyn got elected by ensuring that the Tory government got elected.
To do pogroms against a different group of people.
Exactly, yes. But
They'll
against the right group of people.
They'll actually do them as opposed to figurative ones that Jeremy Corbyn might do in this hypothetical situation I've created and no one has applied any scrutiny to.
Absolutely.
So the point I'm trying to make in bringing this up is I think the reaction to Biden winning has caused a big freak out on the part of the insane right in America. And that led to the January 6th riot, if you want to call it that. And I think, however, that the pushback from the military, which, I mean, is understandable. The military's be like, you can't do this. Like, you're not allowed to try and overthrow the government and take your congressional representatives hostage.
Yeah, that's the CIA's job.
Yeah,
Thank you very much.
We kind of frown upon that.
Yeah.
So
it's like, actually, the reason why the army can't do that is because of like a cross-branch jurisdictional issue.
Exactly.
Like, no. The CIA's got that locked up. They're going to be so pissed off if you try and overthrow the government.
So long story short, because of the fact that the military has made some motions towards things like, they had a safety stand-down day to address like what is white nationalism and like opposing right-wing extremism and white nationalism, and lots of people who are definitely not white nationalists because they have a T-shirt that says so. Are
and
really
a lot of
really
questions
mad
being
about
raised by my shirt that are already answered by my shirt kind of situation.
Yeah. And one of the problems that I've encountered in one of the situations is that I made a false or wrong prediction. I did not think, because after Corbyn lost, for example, every idiot in Britain was like, oh, the bloody woke. They wouldn't shut the fuck up about it. Basically, Britain has decided to declare war against Tumblr in 2014. They are losing their minds about imaginary bullshit. And every day it's a new headline of them inventing some shit to be mad at and then being convinced it's real and then being surprised that like people who aren't white are getting harassed in the street because, the Bazas who read the Express believe it. Well, I didn't expect to see that term apply to the same sort of like pejorative byword. Basically, I have some ideas of what people think they're saying when they say woke, but I don't want to have to drop in the bleeps for racial slurs, so you get the idea. And I've been seeing some pushback from right-wing idiots and veteran idiots basically saying that the military is woke now and officers are woke now. And their argument is that because the officer class in the military, by a very narrow margin, voted more in favor of Biden than Trump. That means the officers are woke now. We're doing critical race theory in the army. Like, Now, the army is terrible. The military, in my experience, is terrible about this stuff. However, you can get in trouble for being racist. If you are really overtly racist, you can, in fact, get in trouble. Now, it's nowhere near as strict as people will lead you to believe, but you can, in fact, be punished for it.
Yeah, well, and that's a bit of a weird thing about like the US, and it's definitely an impression. Like, my sister's worked in the US for a long time. That like the US, despite having like a lot more like kind of like I don't even know how to put this, but like kind of like literally having a prison industrial complex, which is basically continuation slavery. Does also have like way more strict rules about like what you can and can't do in a workplace, for example, as regards racism. Whereas in Britain, it's a bit more like, hey, don't do that.
I mean, Hussein had a great story. Hussein Kasvani, our co-host, has been on this show before too, about when he worked as a as a communications person for a think tank that that focused on religion and society. That one of his coworkers basically went on a huge rant about how Islam is evil and has to be fucking eradicated. Now, Hussein's Muslim, obviously.
Yeah.
And the punishment this guy received was being sent to like a tolerance camp, but like it was like a paid vacation from work. And he's like, so basically, there's no redress to the person who was basically told your religion is the devil, but the guy who said it got to go on holiday and get paid for it.
Damn, I'd love to go to tolerance camp.
Yeah, exactly.
Man, I bet you can't get laid at fucking tolerance camp.
I don't know. Maybe there's lots of Telegraph columnists there. Like, if you're into MILFs, I think you could absolutely, Alison Pearson style kind of thing.
Send me to tolerance camp. I'm going to have a 3-way with fucking like Amber Rudd and Charles Moore. Yeah.
That's a very, very deep British comment that basically only our UK listeners will get. And we do have some, but not a ton.
Charles Moore, who once counted a wad of £20 notes in my presence.
Yes.
Another king. Shout out to that guy.
Another deep, deep cut story.
Yeah.
So they have started bandying the word woke around. Now, Biden is a conservative Democrat. So far, he's maybe at least acknowledged that some left positions exist, more so than Obama did, for sure. But bear in mind, Biden appeared on the ticket in 2008 to basically assuage any concerns that Obama was too far left, because Biden was like a pro-segregation, pro-segregated schools, anti-busing Democrat. Delaware is not a southern state, but is kind of a southern state, we'll put it that way. And that's where he's from. That's where the state he represented.
Wait, you suggesting to me that the fucking tax haven state might be a little bit right-wing?
Yeah, weird how that is. But also like very, very southern city kind of racist-y too. And they were very against busing, which if you don't know what busing is in America, it is basically because of a Supreme Court decision, I believe, they enforced the busing of children to schools outside of the school catchment areas where they lived, because schools were too segregated by basically like geographic location in America. But they actually did this. They did this all over America. It created such insane frothing right-wing racist freakout in America that they very quickly backed away from it. But a lot of the white flight in the 70s was because of, not just because of schools being integrated, but because of busing. Basically, people fled school districts where their kids might be bused to schools with black kids, and thus white flight suburbs were really, really pumped full of people.
The long American tradition of fleeing the bussy.
I knew you were going to make a joke about bussy. So these guys basically, like, they think the military is woke because of Biden.
And look, there's so much evidence to suggest that
exactly. Yeah. The military. Francis and I have a joke that basically to get convicted of war crimes in the U.S. military, you effectively have to do like a Twitch live stream where you do war crimes on camera, and even then, it's like a 50-50 chance you'll even be charged, much less convicted.
And only if people using really insensitive poggers drops while you do it.
Yeah, exactly. They're out there. They're downvoting your stream and saying they want Guga videos instead.
Yeah. You don't want to be caught teabagging the civilians you've just murdered. That's when it's really.
But the thing I'm trying to say, though, is that by and large, the military in the U.S., support for the military, using the military as a cudgel in politics has been a right-wing position. Democrats got really enthusiastic about wielding that under Obama as a kind of reaction to the fact that they were all called traitors under Bush. And then that has continued. So when people make the parodies online, for example, of like, a B-52 dropping a huge payload of bombs is Republicans, and then the same B-52 dropping a payload of bombs, but it's got like Black Lives Matter and a pride flag. Then it's the Democrats. That to me is not too far off the mark. So the funny thing is, I would argue that most anyone could look at that and see that it's very nakedly obvious right-wing militarism, like it's no change in affairs, but a certain subset of either veteran idiot or like right-wing theocrat freak in America is convinced that the military is now, the land of Sodom and Gomorrah. It's become woke, etc.
Well, because there's this thing where I think, and I think this is a bit particular to America, in that I think that our politics is insane, but in a slightly different way, which is that the Republicans and the liberals have a lot of the same delusions about the way that things are. Because on the liberal side, you get like the Charlotte Clymer types, who like they're like, yeah, the military is going to be woke again. I'm going to rejoin the army and do like the woke Iraq war or like whatever the fuck it is that she wants to do. And then like the Republicans see that and they're like, see, the army is woke now. And it's like, no.
One of my former commanders was sharing an article about how a chaplain was being forced to retire because he didn't condone gay marriage, or like he didn't think homosexuality was legal or like should be allowed. He thought it was immoral. And it's like, on one hand, the Army did recruit a lot of chaplains from like Southern Baptist congregations, so that doesn't surprise me. But it's
also like you basically weren't allowed to be gay in the Army until what, 2011?
Yeah.
Yeah. So
surprised you know that date, but yes, that's correct. And so
ye olde 2011, when Priti Patel said we should bring back hanging.
Yeah, and the thing about it is that okay, well, I'm sure there were pastors or chaplains in the military in 1949 who said that race mixing is communism, and they can get the fucking boot too. Like you either get with
and
the
they
program,
were right, which is why it's good.
you can either get with the program. And this is very like a liberal brain take on my part, but you either get with the program or you stop collecting the fucking government welfare. Like you stop collecting that sweet paycheck and benefits that basically no one gets in America except military people. Like, all right, the military's decided if you don't like it, then fucking deal with it and shut up. And if you can't shut up, then you don't get to get 30 days paid vacation and all the free travel and all the benefits and free housing and free education and free healthcare for you and your family. You just don't get it. So fucking deal with it.
Much like everything else in the military. Like if you decide you don't like the haircut or whatever else, fucking shit that you have to do.
And to me, it's like, I find this to be a really tedious argument and really stupid, but that is part of like the sort of culture war in America. And one of the strange things to me has been watching, and Francis and I have talked about this a lot, is watching the sort of like QAnon style people and Blue Lives Matter people move away from troop worship into just full on cop worship because the troops are too left wing or too woke for them. Now, obviously, I am not arguing that the military is left wing or woke in the sense.
It is more left wing than the cops.
Yes, 100%.
Yeah.
100%. Also, like there are things you get away with as a cop that you just more regularly will not get away with as.
I remember
as
having this conversation with my ex-girlfriend who was a British lawyer because we were still together when the Black Lives Matter protests were like seriously kicking off in the States. It was like in the sort of like immediately like 4 or 5 weeks after George Floyd was murdered. And there was a point, I can't even remember which city it was, but there was like lots of cities where they were deploying the National Guard because the cops were getting overwhelmed. And she was going like, oh, that's really bad that they're deploying the National Guard. Like, imagine what they're going to do. And I'm like, oh, they're going to be way better than the cops. Like, because they haven't spent like 20 years learning to fucking beat the shit out of people. Like, the National Guard are mostly people who are just regular people most of the time. Unlike cops who like, this is what they've dreamed of for their entire career. Like, I'm like, the National Guard are going to treat protesters way better than the cops fucking watch. And that was exactly what happened.
Yeah, there were a few incidences here and there where they didn't like, there was a guy who was, who from what we can tell was shot by the National Guard and killed in Louisville, Kentucky. But by and large, the response from the Guard was better, way better, and way more restrained. And like you said, I think it's because cops are like a paramilitary force in America that also has the mafia running their like union protection. It's best to describe. Like, imagine if, the punishment you face for committing a crime while in uniform is like, I don't know, fucking, like Tony Soprano.
6 weeks off on paid leave.
Yeah, I was going to say, like the guys down at the bada bing fucking are judging your case. Like, it's a complete joke. Like it's a racket.
Joey Baloney is judging your case.
Yeah.
God, fucking Joey Baloney. That was an incredible moment.
Oh my God, that's a thing worth a derail just to talk about Joey Baloney. That like, here's
the $125,000 a year, 300 pounds.
Yeah, this like massive, just oval shaped guy just pummeling the shit out of a woman protester who looked like she might have weighed 120 pounds. And then like he's revealed to be making like with overtime like $200,000 a year. And someone found his Twitter, and I'm not joking. It was all like, Blue Lives Matter memorial shit, like cops in communities, like, a cop holding a basketball with like a black teenager. And then when they went in his likes, it was just like that kind of stuff, and him liking pictures of like cannoli and like, you're Italian when you do like that shit. It was so unbelievably that. It was just, he was that guy. He was just like, just completely like somebody who's got roid rage but hasn't taken steroids level of cop brain. And that to me is more indicative of your typical cop than your typical National Guardsman. But the reason why I bring up this in the context of having you on is because I wanted to talk about the UK and Europe and the way in which the military gets wielded as a culture war instrument, and also the way in which the military weighs into politics in both the UK and elsewhere in Europe. And unlike normal podcast episodes where I would start with Britain, I actually wanted to start with a thing about France, hilariously.
Un pays normal.
Oui, c'est le pays le plus normal du monde.
Ouais.
So I'm going to read an article from Deutsche Welle, which is in English, but is the only article I could find on this topic that wasn't by either a liberal newspaper I hate in Britain, which there aren't very many of them because there aren't very many liberal newspapers in Britain.
No, that's true. But you do hate all of them.
Or an insane right-wing tabloid in Britain, which basically
there are many of those.
Framed this story as a positive. Well, this headline is a reaction to the first story, but I'm just going to read it. French soldiers who warned of, quote, civil war to face sanctions. A group of 18 serving soldiers who endorsed a warning about the risk of civil war in France will face sanctions before a military council, the chief of staff of France's armed forces said on Wednesday. The group
immediately extremely funny that a group of 18 serving soldiers who endorsed a warning about the risk of civil war. That's like me sending you a warning that like there's a danger that you're going to be murdered, brackets by me. Like I'm just warning you that that's a concern. You should be concerned about that because I'm going to do it.
You weren't clear on that.
Yeah.
The group
making it your problem. By the way, I'm going to murder you. You should probably take action.
The group, which included 4 officers, signed an open letter in a right-wing magazine, which was also endorsed by at least 20 retired generals. The letter had hinted that the military could take action if France failed to act against residents of immigrant suburban areas. Quote, France is in peril, opined the letter, which added that Islamism and, quote, the hordes from the suburbs could create hate between communities.
I hate the hordes from the suburbs, personally, by which I mean people who come from Kent for a night out in London all but one.
Yes. Yeah, Britain is basically the opposite of France in that regard, isn't it? That like French inner cities are really gentrified and white and relatively like upper middle class and wealthy, whereas like their outer ring suburbs tend to be way more working class and oftentimes non-white. And
yeah, well, because the French basically did like very deliberate like economic and racial segregation, where they were like, right, we're gonna house you, but we're gonna put you in one fucking place so we can keep an eye on you.
All in tower blocks, basically.
Yeah,
where like relatively small towns on the periphery.
They're all named things like Debussy and Berlioz. The highest rate of heroin use in Europe, and it's like Claude Debussy tower block.
Yeah, exactly. Like Héroïne Le Ménil or something like that. Yeah, exactly. So the letter. This is a quote from the letter. Those who run our country must imperatively find the needed courage to eradicate these dangers, said the signatories. They urged the French state to firmly apply the laws of the land to set things right and warned the growing chaos could end in a civil war. Each one will go before a senior military council. General Francois Lecointre told Le Parisien, a local newspaper. Lecointre said that they could be delisted or put into immediate retirement. Meanwhile...
Put into immediate retirement sounds like they're actually going to take him out the back and shoot him. Yeah. Put into immediate retirement.
Tu vas aller en retraite immédiatement. Meanwhile, France's Prime Minister Jean Castex said that the rare intervention in politics by military figures was violating France's Republican principles and the honor and duty of the army. Lecointre emphasized the obligation of neutrality among the members of the military. The open letter was signed by thousands of people, including the soldiers. Some of the signatories are believed to have ties to far-right anti-immigration movements. No. Retired General Antoine Martinez. Oh, what a fucking French name that is.
Oh,
Jesus Christ.
Yeah. No way a French-Spanish army officer could possibly have any kind of right-wing tendencies.
Antoine Martinez, who founded a right-wing group, Volontaires pour la France, that aims to defend traditional French values, was also among the signatories.
I love how cucked all of this shit is. I've started an organization called Volunteers for France, where we try and defend traditional French values. Shut the fuck up.
Yes, we are going to... we must defend the sacrée institution de pédophilie.
Some of these immigrants, they don't even have a maîtresse. It is an assault against everything that is dear in France.
Exactement. No, they don't even eat small songbirds that they have drowned in Armagnac and hide their sin from God by wearing a veil.
One of them, he ate the ortolan, but he was hiding his sin from Allah. This is not right.
I love the idea that like they're furious at what they consider like cultural mixing because you are hiding your sin from God, but you're wearing a niqab while you're doing it, and so it's the wrong kind of veil to wear on your head.
I'm Muslim, so I have to drown the ortolan ortolan in THC oil.
Yeah, you can't drown the ortolan in Armagnac because that's actually haram, but you can find a neutral spirit that's non-alcoholic to murder this innocent songbird after blinding it and forcing it to eat grain for days upon end to fatten it up.
Correct.
God, French cuisine is it's like a combination of like starvation food and just torturing animals. It's unreal. A preface by the magazine said that about 100 ranking officers and over 1,000 military personnel signed the letter. Lecointre denied any influence of right-wing forces in the army. Oh, okay. Florence Parly, France's Minister of the Armed Forces, said that the open letter's endorsement by Marine Le Pen, a French opposition politician, reflected a, quote, serious misunderstanding of the military, unquote, and that it was concerning coming from someone who wanted herself to become the head of the armed forces. Meanwhile, Le Pen told France Info Network that the signatories were owed respect even if one did not agree with them. Now, you need to understand that basically this letter is saying that France is not Islamophobic enough and that there's too many Muslims in France and that we have to crush political Islam or we
need to do reverse Charlie Hebdo, basically.
And what I think this Deutsche Welle article, which doesn't surprise me because German news is also extremely like center-right cucked, is that they're not addressing how Islamophobic this letter is, and also the fact that this was published on this, if I'm not mistaken, the 60th anniversary of a coup attempt against Charles de Gaulle. So, like, this is not...
famously left-wing French leader.
Exactly.
Gaulle,
this is not a particularly subtle threat in any capacity. And, of course, one of the people who is potentially going to be president of France, who's a serious contender, is Marine Le Pen, basically saying, no, they're right. And, of course, all the British tabloids are saying, actually, the generals are right, and all the voters support them, too. And we love French voters in this case only.
I'll tell you what, I don't like the French, but they are right about the Muslims. I'll give them that.
Basically, this argument.
Yeah.
So, I, of course, am interested in what it is that, well, how about this? I'm interested in the fact that this sort of thing has also happened in Britain, but not, from my perspective, trying to warn against, there's too many Muslims in Britain, although the kind of people who would be into this shit would also be into that, but rather... to suggest that if Jeremy Corbyn won the election, the military would remove him.
Yeah.
Now that is a thing that we both saw happen, or saw the threats happen, and were not surprised at all by the way that they took place. So, first of all, I want to get your reactions to the French story, but then I want to talk about an article I found in the Hated Telegraph about Jeremy Corbyn from 2018 before we talk about the real fucking dessert piece. A video of troops shooting at an effigy of Jeremy Corbyn, or a picture of Jeremy Corbyn at a British Army training facility in Afghanistan.
Regular listeners to Trashfuture and However Way will be able to guess which regiment those soldiers were from.
Yes, exactly. Do they have things made of silk that help them fall out of planes?
Yeah. Are they perhaps to be found wearing t-shirts that say "War crimes in Northern Ireland, we did them and it was good"?
Weird how that happens.
Yeah.
So, I mean, with regard to the France thing, I don't know what your take is.
La Belle France.
My take is that there have been some sort of like Lee Rigby style incidents in France recently, more recently than they've happened in Britain. But Britain has had like lone wolf Islamist attacks happen, and like the level of racism and freak outedness has not really gone to fever pitch any more than it already was post 7/7. And I realize I've used a lot of terms here that American listeners might not realize. Lee Rigby was a member of the army band at a base in Woolwich in southeast London who was beheaded by two Islamist guys who were British-born guys who had basically
who were sort of like loosely connected to ISIS.
They had self-declared themselves to be members of ISIS, but like...
they were totally fucking insane.
They're just psychos, and they cut this dude's head off with a meat cleaver in the street outside of his barracks. And this has become, I mean, for obvious reasons, it's become a cause célèbre against... all immigrants in Britain and all Muslims in Britain by the worst people in this country. So there have been some incidences like this in Paris, but I also think the sheer volume of antagonism against Muslims by the French government is much higher than it is here. Like here, it's high, but in France, it's even higher.
Yeah, well, I think also because in France, they have that kind of like 1 foot in, 1 foot out thing with immigration that Britain doesn't really have, where like, and I think they have this a bit in Germany too, where like they will just like randomly let like loads and loads of immigrants or refugees or whatever in, but then also be really racist about it at the same time, whereas Britain just wouldn't let them in the first place. So there's kind of, you get like less of that kind of tension, I think. But yeah, I mean, like particularly France, who like towards the end of their empire were like, oh, everything that's in the French Empire is actually just France, and they gave like everyone in Algeria like a French passport, and then they were like, wait, no, do not come here. We want you to be French over there, not here. But it was too late for that. And so I think France experienced like a way higher degree of like post-colonial immigration from its former colonies than even Britain did. And the French have like never really gotten over it. Particularly because of like, I think the French like to think of themselves as having a very particularly high class way of living, and no immigrants are ever going to match up to their.
What's interesting to me is I know a little bit about the dialogue with regard to immigrants in France, just because of having studied there and having done stuff about French history a little bit. And I think one of the things that this is pointed out a lot is that the sort of French approach to citizenship, the idea of citizenship was basically like, you will like French things and do French things, and notionally we don't care what your ethnicity or religion or skin color is, but of course they do. Like, let's be perfectly honest. There were riots against French guest workers in France who were from the colonies in like the First World War. Like there has been tension against this stuff, people being racist against people who are not white for a long time, but then also, during, I believe, the period of the French Revolution, people who were mixed race who fled Haiti because of basically, Haiti's a complicated subject that I don't want to talk about with like serious authority because I don't know that much about it. But as I understand it, because a significant number of mixed race people in Haiti had basically sided with the colonial regime, they were not particularly welcome to stay once the revolution in Haiti won. And most of them fled to either other places in the Caribbean or to like the southern United States, like New Orleans, French colonial possessions at the time, or back to metropolitan France. And they were French citizens when they went back to metropolitan France. They didn't have, a sort of like formalized legal segregation. But it's not as if the, dark skin or mixed race, black French people were welcome in France in 1795. Similarly, they had a form of education that was very standardized throughout the French Empire, and like a lot, especially in the late 19th century, this was very common that like, you'd be reading the same primer textbooks as a first grader or second grader in Vietnam or in Algeria or in New Caledonia as you would in metropolitan France. And you'd be learning about, our ancestors, the Gauls, even if you were Vietnamese or, from Senegal or from anywhere the French, colonial possessions. So I don't really, there's no form of colonialism that in my opinion is like better, but there are some that were less brutal than others in terms of just like the physical violence they waged on people. You can say the French were probably better in some capacities than the Belgians, but that's not
wasn't everyone better than the Belgians?
But that's not a really fucking good thing to be like that. The bar is below the floor in this case. Yeah. So it's a very strange story, but it does strike me that the anti-immigrant discourse in France has, and specifically weaponizing French laws that were written either immediately after the revolution or after the restoration of the Republic to fight the influence of the Catholic Church being used solely against Muslims. Those are two things that really stand out quite a bit. Britain has some insane stuff, but Britain hasn't tried to ban headscarves. Or in France, for example, you can't wear a headscarf in a government building. You can't wear a headscarf for your license photo, even if your face is revealed. You can't wear a headscarf in schools, I believe.
There was that whole thing about like bikinis at the public pool.
Anything that would be like swimwear that would be appropriate for Muslim women, they won't let them wear.
Yeah.
There are more people in Britain, for example, like there are fewer people in France who wear burqa is the wrong word, but that style where you basically can only see the person's eyes.
Oh, niqab.
I think it is niqab. Yeah. There are fewer people in France who legally, choose to wear that. Far fewer than there are here, and they still freak out completely about it. Whereas in Britain, like, I don't think Baz has positive things to say about it, but from what I can tell, the government isn't making that a thing to fight against.
No, well, there's also kind of I think just like, well, but partly because the aesthetic of politics is so different in France, right? Like, it's just so much more like kind of like, yes, I'm un peu racist and I have a maîtresse, but we're all having the bread with the boursin, it is all good, Whereas I think in America and like Britain, politicians are expected to like kind of toe the line a bit more of like being like,
we're a country of religious freedom.
Exactly, yeah. And like, even if you're, and I think that was part of the reason why liberals lost their mind so much about Trump, was that before that, even Republican presidents kind of had to be like, oh, well, I think Muslims are fine people or whatever, while doing the policy, but they couldn't like come out and say it.
Weirdly, I feel like the bigger wave of Islamophobia in America wasn't because of 9/11, although that did tick off a huge amount.
Yeah.
But rather because of all the right-wing hysteria suggesting that Barack Obama was a Muslim. Yeah. That, I think, made, like, I know people from, who from
Barack Hussein Khazvani Obama.
People who are Muslims in America, and I've read a significant amount about communities in the South, for example, who are like Muslim communities in the Bible Belt, who basically, I mean, I'm not gonna say things were great, but they didn't really get a huge amount of like targeting by local politicians, for example. Yeah. I can't speak to what the daily life was like, but like the way that politics was reported, there weren't people going around saying they were terrorists and bin Laden and shit. And in a way, the fact that they're,
if you've got a conservative religious group emigrating to a conservative religious area.
I was just going to say that exactly. But then post 2008, the hostility just ratcheted up massively. So you have that, but from what I can tell, the government wasn't trying. I don't know of anywhere, like, you'd see more overtly anti-trans stuff in those parts of America as like local ordinances and shit being debated than anything trying to like criminalize Islam. And I think the reason for that is that, you have literally in the First Amendment freedom of religion is protected as well as freedom of speech.
And like similarly in Britain, like lots of the parties definitely engage in policies which are to some degree Islamophobic, but like they're all going to have a picture of at least one woman in a headscarf in their manifesto, because that's just what you do in British politics. Like, you have to be at least superficially liberal and accepting. Like, even the Tories are extremely like, I don't care if you're black, brown or purple. Like, that's their whole thing. And like, there are plenty of non-white Tory politicians.
There are lots of Muslim Tories. There's lots of them. It's just very few of them, for example, are like Bengali, but like, but like there are lots of Muslim Tories,
Exactly.
And
so I think it's partly that the aesthetic of politics here is different, but I also think that there is this kind of, there is like, and I think perhaps stronger even in British right-wing politics than in British left-wing politics, there is quite a strong like liberal bent. Like, there is a kind of like this thing
classical
about like,
liberal
the government's not going to tell me what to do. And so they're kind of like the whole thing about Tony Blair trying to introduce ID cards, which proved to be completely impossible because like everyone was just refusing to have one, and they spent billions on it, and in the end they had to can it. And I think the same thing about like, as much as like the Baz types don't like the Muslims and would like to fuck with them, the idea that like the government can just introduce sweeping laws about like what you can and can't wear, I think doesn't sit right with those people.
Yeah.
Not because they have any affection for Muslims or, the cultural kind of background of wearing a headscarf or whatever, but purely because they're like, hang on a minute, the government's going to start telling people what to do.
Exactly.
It's that impulse rather than anything else.
And I think the thing that you have to realize is that what the French word is laïcité, which literally means like secularism. Those laws were specifically introduced to fight the Catholic Church. And the fact that France was like the most authoritarian Catholic country in like the Catholic world up, into like the 19th century. So obviously, to me, it just seems very, very, very cynical. And the French people were like, well, no, it is not the same. We ban you wearing a crucifix as well as wearing a headscarf. It's like, those are not the same thing. Like, okay, if you're in a school, you maybe legally can't wear your crucifix outside of your shirt. But like, for one, you won't be arrested or penalized for doing so if you do. And number two, like, you can also just wear it inside your shirt. It doesn't really matter. It's not like you can't wear it. Whereas like, the whole thing with the headscarf is it covers your hair. And like, if you're not allowed to wear it, then it's insane. So to me, this happening, I feel like the army weighing in and the fact that like, British tabloids are churning up this shit, basically trying to like get British Baz readers to side with French generals who are threatening to do a coup, because apparently you have to do at least one coup every 60 years against a French president.
Absolutely.
that does not surprise me. However, talking about
I was all in favour of the French coup until I found out they were going to replace him with someone else French. That's no fucking good, is it? Get someone in there and do it proper.
So now we're going to talk about the British version of wielding the military in politics.
Yeah.
This is a story from May 2018, a different time, a purer time, a better time for all of us.
Better times all
Things
around.
have only gotten worse.
I was still living in Russia then.
I was going to say, things have only gotten worse. To the opposite of the D-Ream song, things could only get worse from this moment forward.
That is true.
The headline is, could an army coup remove Jeremy Corbyn just as it almost toppled
fact, this was
Harry
posted
Wilson?
on the 9th of May 2018, Victory Day, when Riley, Emma and I, with the world's biggest hangover, found ourselves locked in a hotel in Moscow because of the military parade that was going on outside.
All right, so I'm going to read some paragraphs of this until I get mad. And once I get mad, we can just talk.
Okay.
Only 1 week after Jeremy Corbyn's election as Labour leader, a serving general of the army warned of a direct and public challenge if a future Prime Minister Corbyn jeopardized the country's security. Quote, the army wouldn't stand for it. People would use whatever means possible, fair or foul, to prevent that, unquote. The idea of a military coup against an elected Prime Minister Corbyn may seem fanciful, yet 50 years ago this week, this almost happened to Harold Wilson, a Prime Minister regarded by many as left-wing and anti-establishment who had been accused of consorting with communist spies. On May 8th, 1968, Earl Mountbatten of Burma, same Lord Mountbatten, yeah? Same, or is this different Mountbatten?
There's so many fucking Mountbattens, man. They're all Mountbattens.
All
the royal family are Mountbattens, basically.
All right. Hosted an extraordinary meeting in his London home in Kennington Street, Belgravia. The attendees were Cecil King, chairman of the International Publishing Corporation, which owned the Daily Mirror, its editor, Hugh Cudlip, great names, and at Mountbatten's invitation, his longstanding friend, Sir Solly Zuckerman, the government's chief scientific advisor.
Yeah. And the Mirror is the only left-wing British tabloid, basically.
Yeah, I don't know what it was back then, if it was left-wing back then.
I'm pretty sure it always has been.
Yeah.
I mean, it's not that left-wing. It's a British newspaper.
Yeah,
but
exactly.
It's like, as the tabloids go, it's the left-wing one. It's certainly not the right-wing one.
Yeah, it was pretty pro-Corbyn compared to any other British newspaper.
But it's like a Baz left-wing.
Yeah. It's hashtag Socialist Sunday left-wing.
Yeah.
Astonishingly, the 68-year-old Mountbatten was invited by King to head up a government of national emergency whereby certain members of the armed forces, businessmen, and other city figures would take over and replace the unpopular and mistrusted Wilson and his cabinet. So could history repeat itself under a Jeremy Corbyn premiership? First, things would need to get pretty bad. Certainly should investor confidence collapse, the economy unravel, and unemployment rise, then an unpopular leader intent on ruling out Trident, ambiguous on NATO, and implementing a defense diversification, swords into plowshares policy would no doubt raise eyebrows within the armed forces.
This whole thing was just so stupid. Like, I mean, the idea. I mean, first of all, I don't even know why that general fucking said that, because this obviously was never going to happen. Like, because like even the example they're drawing here of 1968 is like, yeah, another thing that didn't fucking happen and was like entirely made up, basically.
Yeah.
Like, I think that like people really misunderstand the British establishment and the way that it works. I think particularly when you're comparing it to a country like France, which has just like an unending history of governments being overthrown by like the military and by other forces. Like in Britain, we really don't have that.
It's never happened.
It's never happened. There's no real reference. I mean, we did have a civil war, but it wasn't really that kind of thing. I just can't really see a group of British officers overthrowing the government because they literally spend their whole time being like, well, our entire job is to defend the government. Like, I don't really like, they might grumble about Corbyn or whatever, but like this whole thing is like such a mad right-wing fantasy.
Yeah, and this paragraph, this penultimate paragraph written by this freak says, should Prime Minister Corbyn implement radical policies with dire economic consequences while at the same time attempting to reconstitute the British state, who knows what might go through the minds of a new generation of more sober-minded generals? Even if it failed, as seems likely, the result would be to sow terrible division in our country. This is just a dude jacking off at the idea of a coup overthrowing Corbyn, because in May 2018, it seemed very possible that Corbyn could be prime minister.
Yeah. And it's like the fucking, like the division is already there. It's so mad to like, and it's also weird because there are like interesting analyses you can do of like how the military behaves when it is put into extreme situations. I mean, there's all that stuff about like the nuclear missile scare in Russia where that fucking Russian army guy elected not to fire back. And then like, as like a case study in like how people behave in those situations. And like I think there have been lots of studies like during wartime of shit like the James Blunt shit in Kosovo where he refused to attack the Russian army position, and eventually got the British army top brass to back him up against the Americans. Like shit like that, where it's actually interesting. Like there's actually something to be said there about like kind of sort of a kind of civil disobedience within the army, but like the British army's never going to overthrow the British government. What the fuck are you smoking? Fucking honking on that shit that killed Diana. Like, yeah, just, yeah. Like the British government has a rear guard that stops left-wing people getting into power. It's called the entirety of the British media and establishment. Like, they don't need the army.
Speaking of which, to close this off like a fine dessert.
Absolutely.
In April 2019, a story, the headline is, video shows British troops firing at Jeremy Corbyn poster.
Yeah. And for those of you who are wondering which regiment they're from, they are, of course, from the Parachute Regiment.
The Ministry of Defense has launched an urgent investigation after a video emerged via social media that shows members of the Parachute Regiment firing at a poster of Jeremy Corbyn at a target range in Kabul.
Classic banter.
MOD insiders say they believe the video, which had the caption, "Happy with that," was genuine, but inquiries are taking place to establish why an image of the Labour leader studded with bullet marks was used. The video shows 4 soldiers clearly identifiable as members of the 3rd Battalion Parachute Regiment stationed in Afghanistan using simulation weapons. But Brigadier Nick Perry, the commander of 6th Air Assault Brigade, acknowledged the video showed a, quote, serious error of judgment that was, quote, being fully investigated. He added, the Army is and always will be a totally apolitical organization. Corbyn said, I'm shocked, obviously, that this sort of thing has happened. I hope the Ministry of Defense will conduct an inquiry and into it and find out what was going on and who did that.
Classic Jeremy Corbyn, just like kind of like,
and it's just, to me, like you said, I think the bigger thing here is that this is more evidence of how unbelievably like reactionary and right-wing British media, political culture, like society in general is.
Yeah.
Like this is not the generals plotting a coup against Corbyn as fantasized in that Telegraph piece. This is just what people think.
There's not a single fucking officer in that video. Like, come on.
Yeah,
come on.
Yeah,
no way. Those are all fucking enlisted guys. Like, and what do fucking enlisted British soldiers read? The fucking Sun. And what do they say in the Sun about how we should all murder Jeremy Corbyn? Like, it's like it's a bizarre way of like getting into the fact that just like British society is fucking insane.
Yeah.
That one was particularly funny to me. Is the idea that like that is a temperature taker of the army rather than a measurement of British society, because that is exactly the sort of thing which like if I chat to one of my mates who's in the army would be just like, you're never going to guess what I caught a bunch of privates doing today, and now I have to write like 8-page report about. Like, that is exactly the kind of shit. Yeah. I can't really imagine a bunch of officers but like signing a letter being like, yeah, it's too bloody right, lads.
Well, see, that's the thing, right? I think in all of these cases, to me, both United States, France, the United Kingdom, this is more an indication of like an outburst of stuff that's already circulating in popular culture because of like right-wing paranoia and freakouts and conspiracy theories and stuff. And that, a bunch of serving French military officers, NCOs, retired generals, etc., signing a letter saying like, we're going to do a civil war, we're going to coup you if you don't be more Islamophobic, is the same as a bunch of Paris shooting a picture of Jeremy Corbyn because they read in the paper that he loves the IRA and wants to kiss Jerry Adams and whatever. It's the same as a bunch of guys saying,
in his defense, Jerry Adams is very sexy, as officially acknowledged by the Thatcher government.
I was going to say, I mean, he's reinvented himself as like a quirky dad on Twitter. But do not get on his bad side.
No.
And similarly, like, people going after Biden and saying, and this is not as a defense of Biden, but basically inventing a fantasy version of what Biden is and Biden does to say that like he's brainwashed the military into being trans or something.
It's difficult to say who's more annoying, the people who love Biden or the people who hate him, really, isn't it? It's a close run thing. I mean, anything involving the Parachute Regiment is always a great insight into what happens when the official sport of a place where you work is punching each other in the head where you're not allowed to block or dodge punches. That is the official sport of the Parachute Regiment. It's called milling. Look it up. And that's what it does to you. Before you know it, you're shooting at pictures of Jeremy Corbyn.
Fair enough. Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, Milo, I appreciate your insights as ever. we're going to run a quick promo of the bonus episode this week, which is Francis speaking to a guy named Will Nguyen, who is the Star Trek commie and talks about communism as portrayed in Star Trek, which is very interesting because Gene Roddenberry was in fact a communist, but Star Trek obviously is a big commercial show and has spanned generations and lots of stuff. So very interesting conversation. I'll play about 10 minutes of that. If you're interested in hearing the full thing, it's available on the Patreon. The link is in the show notes.
So, Will, other than Bar Association, what would be a good episode that encapsulates how you feel about Star Trek? Because Bar Association is the obvious.
Right. Of course, it's a classic one. I would say The Neutral Zone. The Neutral Zone from TNG, which is the end of season 1, where the stockbroker character is literally unfrozen, and Picard has to explain to him like your stock holdings, your wealth no longer exist. We've outgrown that stage of infancy, right? And his mind is blown, right? Because he had all this prestige, all this power, literally because of capitalism, literally because of private property, and him being able to command people, and no longer is that way in the future. It was very definitive break. It's one of the best parts about early TNG, season 1, season 2. They're very adamant. They're very direct about that type of message. And I would say, episodes like Past Tense and Deep Space Nine, and episodes like Far Beyond the Stars and Deep Space Nine also lend themselves so well to a Marxist analysis of saying, homelessness and is a social problem, but what are the root causes of these social problems? Why do we seem to actually still are unable to transcend these types of limitations, transcend these types of social ills? Really raises the question of revolutionary politics, raises the question of militancy. And then Far Beyond the Stars is also a great example because it looks, it's that episode where, of course, Benny Russell, Sisker's kind of alter ego in 1950s New York, right, persecuted because he was a black man wanting to write a better science fiction, write a better world for black people, right? And you see how racist the cops were and murdered Sergei Lofton, who played Jimmy, who was a character there, for basically nothing, right? Petty larceny, right? Very much a clear example, a clear parallel to what's going on now with Dante Wright and Trayvon Martin and George Floyd. And the Deep Space Nine documentary, which I highly recommend any Star Trek fan to watch, they hone in on Far Beyond the Stars, saying, not a lot has changed, right? They come from a very liberal perspective, though, saying like, it's an individualistic choice of how we need to look beyond our own prejudices, look beyond our own biases, right? And we're not that much different now than when the episode first aired. And I would say, as a Marxist, we would say there's a material reason why racism exists. There's a material reason why the police exist. The police have not always existed. So we refer back to kind of the classic works of Marxism, Lenin and State and Revolution, saying, what is the state, if not the armed bodies of men to defend private property? In its final analysis, that's what the state is. And that's what we can see with all the violence that's been happening, all the murders that have been happening, is that's what the state is. They have all this money to oppress you, right? There's no money for PPE. There's no money for stimulus checks. There's no money for healthcare. But there's plenty of money for tear gas, truncheons, tanks, drones to oppress you, right? To imprison you, right? And that's not a new analysis. Where that was already determined by socialists in the past, of saying that is the real nature of the state. It poses a question. Is it a question of taking over the state apparatus and electing more diverse police chiefs, right? Is that the answer to avoid Benny Russell from being harassed by the cops? Like, the answer is no. The answer is overthrowing capitalism and putting the workers in control, and the workers are defending themselves, right? And you can kind of see that happening in the real world right now. You elected Barack Obama twice, and what happened was that you had Ferguson happen under his watch, right? You elected a black mayor in Chicago, Lori Lightfoot. You elected a black mayor in Atlanta, with Keisha Knight Bottoms. Guess what? They still kill black people, but they're black mayors, right? I thought we progressed beyond that, and it shows you what is the actual nature of the state. You can't swap out diverse oppressors, right? It's the underneath apparatus, it's the underlying apparatus, and that's a question of revolution. That's a question of socialism and a socialist revolution. I think it's not a new question, and that's why looking at these episodes, That's how you look at it with fresh eyes to say, why haven't things changed from Benny Russell to Rodney King to George Floyd? It's the exact same thing. And yet somehow, nothing seems to have changed. In fact, it's gone worse. So I think that's why a Marxist analysis for those particular episodes are so good.
Yeah, and I really think if there's episodes that you want to watch from Deep Space Nine or from Star Trek, Next Generation, and those are the only two that I really know well. I didn't watch too much Voyager, and I haven't watched much since then. Although I want to get into Discovery because I learned that Discovery is what I've always wanted, which was the Federation during the fall of the Federation. So I'm gonna have to kind of get into that because I've been reading up on it. Like, oh, okay, this sounds fun. And then Lower Deck sounds like a lot of people are really enjoying that as well. But I think Past Tense 1 and 2, if you don't know those episodes, they pretty much take place in 2024 San Francisco. Like they get, wibbly wobbly, timey wimey, snap back into reality, and Cisco and Jadzia Dax and I think Bashir are the three.
Yep.
Are the three who get and basically there are a rich elite, and then there are these slums where they just put all the poor and the infirm and the people who can't work, and then they point guns at them and say, you can't do anything, you don't get to go anywhere. And like in Star Trek history, like the history of getting up to where we have this forward-facing, Federation communism, that's a very pinnacle point, and it's a point that's just like, you can see us doing that. Like maybe in 1995 when this was released, it was kind of far-fetched, but here we are 25 years later, and just like, yeah, I could absolutely see, a basically an American-run ghetto like that, where we're just going to start putting people, and as you said, we oppress them. And I mean, we have that now. Like, what do we? North City, St. Louis, where I live, is just basically a impoverished, oppressed area, and it's quote dangerous. But like, why? Why is it dangerous? Because people don't have their material needs in these areas met. And if you're not doing that, yeah, you're gonna have violence, and you don't get to say like, well, these people are being violent against us because their needs are not being met. And by needs, I mean food, water, shelter, medical, not like, they want a new iPhone or whatever. They need these things. And the state tries to use violence to keep them down, when it would just be easier to go in and say, here's what you need. Here's some jobs. Here's some food. Here's some doctors. Here's all the people that are going to take care of you. Please don't shoot us. And that's all you need to do. But sometimes it takes like, the reason why so much socialism and communism comes from violent revolution is because eventually people get so oppressed that the only way to break out of these things is through the violent revolution. And sorry for the Romanov family, but maybe you shouldn't have been oppressing the Russians for, a couple of decades. Sorry you guys got, gunned down in your own house. But don't be assholes. Once again, stop being a bunch of assholes. So Past Tense 1 and 2 are definite ones that I want to suggest. And then, as you said, also Far Beyond the Stars, which is another one that does not take place on the ship. It takes place in Sisko's mind as he's a 1950s science fiction reporter. And those are the ones that I really appreciate, that it's not a science fiction show. It's a human show that has some science fiction elements to it. I would also say my favorite, and I actually wrote about this a while back, and got Aaron Eisenberg read it before he passed, because his episode of Deep Space Nine, when he loses his leg and has to go through post-traumatic stress disorder, like, I'm a veteran, I understand that, and they really capture it very well. And that's like, this is the 90s. Nobody's doing this except for Star Trek. Like, and that's, I think for me, that's what I love about Star Trek, is you have so many things where it's like, we have to be a sitcom, we have to be safe. The 90s was big for action movies with Arnold Schwarzenegger, Face Off, and, all these, like, the pre 9/11 but post 80s Cold War mentality of action films. And then you've got Star Trek, which is just like, no, we're going to tell completely different stories. we're going to say that maybe these things are good. We're going to tackle human stories in space, and we're going to turn ourselves inward and try to understand and better ourselves with it. And somehow it worked. They still got 7 seasons of Next Generation, 7 seasons of Deep Space Nine. How many seasons did they get? 7 of Voyager? I can't remember.
They did. They got 7 of Voyager. They got 4 of Enterprise, and there was a brief hiatus until the new JJ movies, and then Discovery, and now you have Picard, Strange New Worlds, Lower Decks, Prodigy. It is a veritable goldmine of Trek that's happening now. But that was the 90s Trek, right? The 7 seasons in the 24th century. I think that's right. I think that was really the high watermark of Trek in a lot of ways. Allowed people to tell these stories, and I think that's you accurately described it. It is a canvas to tell many different types of stories. You can tell a funny one. You could tell one that has a heavy Shakespearean themes. You could tell one that's an allegory for war and conflict. There's one that's kind of like a workplace comedy, and one is just kind of like a talky conference room episode. I think that's what's so great about Star Trek is that it's just a setting that's very versatile and able to tell many different types of stories.
All right. Thank you again for listening, Milo. Thank you for making time for this.
It's been my pleasure. I always love to talk about, Britain, France, the parachute regiment.
Guys shooting things, punching things.
It's all too bloody right.
Yeah, exactly. And for more of that, just tune in next week where we will be back. See you then.
Catch you later.